Welcome back from the break. Now, the President of the United States has now said that talks with Iran could happen within the next 2 days and that they are now more than likely to happen in Islamabad. Of course, earlier in the show, we've already heard details about that famous phone call. This is how that phone call was reported by the New York Post, whose reporter was just with us. It says additional US-Iran peace talks could be happening over the next 2 days in Pakistan. Pakistan's capital, the president said in an initial phone interview, Trump had claimed that discussions were happening, but a little bit slow. So clearly things have happened and they have changed very rapidly. Now, just think about that. They're going to happen in Islamabad if they happen. Again, not Europe, not any other venue, Islamabad. And Trump didn't just say this casually. He said it while praising Pakistan's role and making it clear that the center of gravity in this diplomacy has indeed shifted.
I think it was the first time that you'd ever seen the Iranian government, the U.S. government meet at such a high level, maybe in the history of the current leadership of Iran. So that's, I think, a positive. And again, we did make some progress in the negotiation. The big question from here on out is whether the Iranians will have enough flexibility, whether the Iranians will accept the critical things that we need to see in order for things to get done.
Now hold that thought, because at the exact same time, the US has launched a naval blockade targeting Iranian ports through the Straits of Hormuz. So, on one track, diplomats are preparing to talk. On another, warships are already in motion. And that is the real contradiction that I have been talking about repeatedly. If talks are that close, why do you need to escalate? And if escalation is necessary, why are the talks picking up again? That's the question at the center of everything. Now, before we go further, we need to understand what is actually being negotiated, because this is not vague diplomacy. This is hard bargaining. And at the core of this entire crisis is the sanctions regime. Decades of layered pressure, from asset freezes to energy restrictions to financial isolation, and most importantly, secondary sanctions that force the entire world to comply. So when Iran talks about relief and the US talks about leverage, this is what they mean. And let's talk about what they mean. Currently, there are two kinds of sanctions on Iran, the primary and secondary sanctions, which are going to become part of the negotiations whenever they happen, hopefully in Islamabad. Primary ones apply only to the US persons and entities enforced by Office of the Foreign Assets Control, and they prohibit trade, financial transactions, and investment. The secondary ones apply globally to non-US actors. Penalty, loss of access to US financial system, and the effect is forces international compliance with US policy. So this is essentially how the sanctions look like, and they are going to become extremely relevant in the coming days. And now, since we're talking about the coming days, let's just add the latest developments. Vice President of the US, J.D. Vance, says there was progress in Pakistan. Iran says Pakistan is relaying messages between Tehran and Washington. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif is now traveling across to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey. And a 4-country coordination meeting, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, has already taken place in Islamabad. Now, here's the route. Prime Minister has already left. He has gone from Islamabad to Riyadh, which is going to be really crucial because Saudi Arabia is now playing a central role in terms of how the negotiations actually shape up and what happens in the coming days. From there, he's going to go to Doha, Qatar. Qatar, of course, has been saying the right kind of things. They have also welcomed Pakistani mediation. So this will be very, very important. And then, of course, to Turkey, where Pakistan has real close diplomacy, and Turkey is also playing a very important role.
When it comes to the talks in Islamabad, we remain, in contact with our brothers in Pakistan who are leading this mediation. As you have seen, there has been a lot of calls and prospective visits from Pakistani officials and with the Qatari officials, and all of this is within this kind of coordination that the whole region actually is engaging with Pakistan. We applaud the efforts of Pakistan. We support their efforts.
It is absolutely clear that this is not routine diplomacy. This is momentum. And that is the key point tonight. Momentum is building towards another round. But this round cannot be symbolic. It has to deal with substance. Because one of these issues is money, real money, tens of billions of dollars in Iranian assets that are held abroad. But here's the catch. These are not freely usable funds. They are restricted, controlled, and politically conditional. So the question is not just how much, but how and when access to these funds is given. Now, let's come back to the blockade. One thing is very clear. A naval blockade is not pressure. It is actually an act of war. And Iran has responded accordingly with warnings of retaliation and escalation. China has now openly criticized the blockade, calling it dangerous and irresponsible. This is the extremely significant statement from the Chinese president. Says we must not allow the world to revert to the law of the jungle. Now clearly, without naming Trump and America, he is referring to what the American president is doing. The Chinese president saying all this means that China is now extremely concerned about the way things are going, and he has also given this 4-point peace plan, which says peaceful existence and regional security architecture, respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, uphold international law, balance development with security. So you can see how the role that the United States used to play as a global stabilizer, that role this man is now actually playing, and things have completely changed in the way that the world is being run. So, bottom line, this is not just about US and Iran. This is becoming a broader geopolitical contest in so many words, and therefore, again, another reason to essentially explain what I'm trying to say is that the spokesman of the Chinese Foreign Ministry has also said that with the temporary ceasefire agreement still in place, the US ramped up military deployment and resorted to a targeted blockade. This will only aggravate confrontation, escalate tension, undermine the already fragile ceasefire, and further jeopardize safe passage through the Straits of Hormuz. So you get the drift of where things are going on. And when we talk about the drift, of course, we have to talk about the Straits of Hormuz. Now here I'm talking about the blockade. The US position is enforcing sanctions, protecting freedom of navigation, responding to Iranian extortion. That's the reason that they're giving for this blockade, which is being done all over this place. The blockade is happening in international waters. Under international law, a blockade without UN approval can be seen as an act of war, and intercepting neutral ships is legally questionable. This is the essential criticism on this US action of a blockade. We will talk about this legal issue shortly in the second half of the program. But as you can see, the blockade is already in place, and these are the two ships which were recorded as trying to go through the blockade, and then they were turned back. That's happening this happened recently, so that goes to show that this is actually taking shape. But there's a lot of criticism coming, and that's the real issue, that this blockade is now coming under intense scrutiny. China has, of course, said that it has criticized the blockade as escalation and is still moving some tankers. Britain says not fully backing the US, concerned about the legality and escalation, very important here. And Saudi Arabia, of course, Saudi officials have urged the US to end the blockade and the Straits of Hormuz. So piling up, pressure is piling up in many ways, and therefore I think it would be in the fitness of things to say that at the heart of this context, beyond this, is the nuclear issue, and this will become much more apparent in the days to come. This is essentially where everything is converging for Iran and for the US. Low enrichment, civilian use, high enrichment moves you towards weapons capability, and once you're near that threshold, the stakes change completely. This is why the disagreement between a 5-year and a 20-year suspension matters so much, which is what has been debated the last couple of days. Now, as in reference to what I just said, of course, one delays, the other reshapes the strategic timeline. Now, if you look at the Iranian enrichment program, these are universal enrichment thresholds which are recognized, accepted. 3 to 5% enrichment is okay for civilian use. 20% enrichment is meant for research level. 60% near weapons threshold. 90% weapons grade. So this is the category of how you measure that. The JCPOA, which is again now being talked about a lot, the agreement between the Obama administration and Iran, its baseline was enrichment capped at 3.6%, centrifuges limited to 5060 IR1 and strict stockpile limit. So this was what was already agreed upon. The Trump administration threw it out, and now we are trying to find a new agreement. Now on this issue, of course, I was talking about China. Now Russia has also jumped in, and you can see how this conflict is now getting bigger and bigger and expanding. The Russian foreign minister Sergei Lavrov has said, we will accept any decision that suits the Iranian side based on its legitimate rights. I very much hope that those directly involved in the talks, the US side in this case, will take a realistic approach, take into account the interest of the entire region, and will not continue the unprovoked aggression. Russians can't make their position more clear than this. So that's what essentially means when we talk about this conflict expanding. And that's essentially why the last round also stalled, this nuclear issue. Not because talks failed, I've been saying that repeatedly, but because the core issue remained unresolved. Now, bring in the bigger context. The previous nuclear deal, the JCPO, which I just referred to, was built on limits in exchange for sanctions relief. That's important. But it had built-in expiry. And when the US withdrew, the entire structure collapsed. Now negotiators are not rebuilding a system. What they're trying to do is to build a new one from the wreckage of the old one. And this is where things get even more complicated. Because sanctions are not just policy, they're law. Some can be lifted easily, others are deeply embedded, which means sequencing becomes critical. In other words, who moves first, who verifies, who guarantees compliance, and then of course there's technology. Iran's centrifuge capability today is far more advanced than before. More efficiency, faster enrichment, shorter breakout time. So here's the uncomfortable truth. You can dismantle machines, you cannot erase knowledge. I mean, that's the fundamental reality. So now the choices become clearer. There are only a few possible outcomes: a return to a deal, an interim arrangement, a comprehensive agreement, or no agreement and escalation. And now this brings me back to Pakistan, because Pakistan is not just hosting talks, it is driving the process, as you can see. It's building alignments, relaying messages, pushing for outcome, not just dialogue. And that is why Islamabad matters, because if the next round happens and all signs suggest it might, it will not just be another meeting, it will be a test of whether momentum becomes resolution or collapses into escalation. And that brings us back to the core truth. Talks did not fail, they stalled. And that means the choice still exists: escalation or resolution. And here is the line that defines this moment. The closer diplomacy gets, the more dangerous escalation becomes, because pressure begins to build. And that's where we are. The pressure is building every single day, which is why we are trying to look for an off-ramp. Everybody is trying to look for an off-ramp. And in this process, the naval blockade that we have been discussing, that naval blockade is not helping matters. It is enhancing tension. It is trying to, even though it is trying to provide the United States an upper hand, it is fraught with dangers. There is a lot of information about the blockade that is relevant, and that will feed into the next segment that we are about to go into, an interview with an expert, US expert, legal expert from... Hello and welcome, I'm Fahd Husain. We come to you on a day filled with important developments and a hope for peace. Prime Minister of Pakistan Shahbaz Sharif is on a whirlwind trip to 3 countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Turkey, in an effort to perhaps organize the second meeting between Iran and the United States in the coming days, which is looking like a serious possibility after President Donald Trump's remarks yesterday, which we will talk about more. Even though Iran's foreign minister has just said that no specific dates have been set for the talks. But we are optimistic and the world is optimistic. Islamabad, it seems, is ready to play its part. Today we have a very special guest who will shed light on what Mr. Trump said yesterday, because what he said to her. And later on, a maritime legal expert from the United States Naval War College will join us and help us understand the legal aspects of the American naval blockade. But first, we start with President Trump's famous phone call to Islamabad yesterday. So we have a very special guest here today, and the reason why that guest is now trending in many ways in Pakistan is because she has just had a huge scoop. And getting a scoop in our language, in the language of the media, of course, at a time when the situation is so volatile and the scoop is connected to the largest, biggest, most important story that is trending everywhere in the world, is obviously a big thing. And we are fortunate that she is joining us today. Let me introduce her. Caitlin Dornbos is the New York Post national security reporter. She's been here in Islamabad to cover the Islamabad talks, which ended, and then all the international journalists went back, but she stayed back. And then something really important happened. Let's just dive right into it and ask her how she got this big scoop. Welcome to our show.
Thank you so much.
So what happened was, you were with us also 2 days back, and then yesterday suddenly, of all the people, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, calls you. And you get a story of a lifetime. So first, let's talk about what exactly happened.
Sure. Well, I was still here, right? And I was trying to figure out whether I should go home or not. And obviously I wanted to break the news of whether there were talks. I kept seeing on Pakistani Twitter that there were different maybe talks going to be happening on Thursday. So I thought I better get the president on record and also see if I needed to cancel my flight. So I called him. It wasn't the first time I've called him, but he answered, and I asked him, and he kind of shooed me off the phone pretty quickly and said, you know, things are happening, but it's pretty slow. Go ahead and go home. It's not going to happen anytime soon. And even if they do happen, they're not going to happen in Pakistan. I said, what about Turkey? What about some of these other locations? He said, maybe Central Europe.
Let's go step by step.
Yeah.
This is really interesting.
Sure.
So this isn't the first time you've spoken to President Trump. I know what happened yesterday, but I want a little bit of suspense there.
Sure.
So this isn't the first time you've spoken to him.
Right.
How is that? Like, how do you know him?
Well, sure. I mean, I just know him professionally, obviously. So I'm a reporter for a newspaper that he reads a lot.
Okay.
He's a New Yorker, so with the New York Post,
Right.
he has that relationship there. And I had received his phone number from a source some time ago. And I call him for quotes occasionally when there's a story that necessarily needs it. And
This was before he became the president or after he became?
Since he's become president.
Okay, so you just call him directly and say you need a quote, and he picks up the phone, or he texts you back?
He has he'll pick up the phone and he'll just respond to whatever the question is. They're usually very short interviews, and but over the course of my work, we've been able to get to know each other on a very small scale, and you know, he's always very kind, honestly, which is something that's I appreciate being able to.
But normally, if you're calling the President of the United States, would you just like directly call him, or would you text him and say, you know, I need to speak with you, are you available? I mean, you don't want to call him while he's in the middle of a situation room, you know, making some decision that's going to change the way this world looks like. So how does that work?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you have to take that telephone number very seriously.
Right.
You're not calling all the time. You're not trying to annoy the President of the United States. So I look at his schedule. His schedule is public.
Right.
So whenever he's got a meeting, I make sure I don't call. And I only call, I mean, maybe once a week, once every couple of weeks. and so I make sure that it's not, and you know, of course, he doesn't have to answer my call.
Right, right.
So I always just, he doesn't answer every time I call.
Okay. And normally when he you know, picks up the phone and you speak with him, you just ask him a couple of questions, you take your notes, and he's responsive that way.
Yeah, he is usually responsive when I do call. I've asked him about a number of issues. He really started picking up the phone just this year, particularly after the raid on Venezuela. He was speaking with members of the press, and as he has been participating in some of these major breaking news stories across the world, he is more apt to speak to reporters.
So based on all of this and based on this history of you calling and him responding, yes, you've been in Islamabad for many days now. You covered the talks, you were reporting, filing, and then you stayed back. And then yesterday, you weren't sure if Islamabad 2.0 is going to happen. And you thought, well, instead of asking this, that, or the other, let me just call up Donald Trump and ask him whether he plans to, you know, do an agreement. So you messaged him?
Well, there's no better source than the source himself. So I called. Initially, he didn't answer, and then I called back again, and he answered.
And he picked up the phone. And where were you when you called him?
I was just at my hotel.
At the hotel?
Yeah.
And he picked up the phone? And then what did you ask him?
I asked him if
Did he know you were in Pakistan?
I told him. So I asked him about potential talks, and then I happened to mention, hey, I'm here in Islamabad.
Yeah.
Should I come home? And he said, go ahead and come home. I don't think they're going to happen in Islamabad. I'm not even sure if they're going to happen anytime soon. So I took that as the go-ahead to say, okay, these aren't going to happen. I kept my flights, and then I put out a story saying they're not going to happen in Islamabad. And then 37 minutes later, I looked down at my phone, and I have a call from the President of the United States.
And you were still at the hotel?
Yes.
You were just walking out, you were like in the lobby?
Yeah, I was just at the hotel and in the middle of work, and I was filing stories back home for the New York Post, and my phone rings, and I answer it.
And what did he say?
He says, you called earlier and you asked whether or not you should go home. You should stick around for about 48 more hours. There's going to be there could be some news developing. He says things are progressing, and I've decided that if these talks do happen, they will happen in Islamabad. And then he went a step further and told me why.
What did he say?
Yeah, he attributed that to his relationship with the field marshal here, and how he's very impressed with the work that he's been doing and their relationship that they've built over ending the war last year with India.
And so when he called you back and said, stick around, don't go back, was he sounding hopeful? Was he sounding positive? Was he sounding pretty sure of himself to be able to call you back like that and just, you know, tell you stick around?
Yeah, certainly. The tone had changed. I don't exactly know what happened within that amount of time.
Between 37 minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
But the tone had changed quite a bit. He wasn't very hopeful when we first had that initial conversation. The second time he called, he was very hopeful. He seemed to be expecting something good to be happening, and I think that there could be something in the works now.
And he said in so many words that if talks happen, when he was talking to you, he told you directly if the talks happen, they will happen in Islamabad.
Absolutely.
He was pretty clear about that.
Yes. The only thing that was unclear is whether the talks will actually happen, and that is because it depends on Iran. But absolutely, if the talks happen, they will happen in Pakistan. That's what President Trump says, at least.
And then he explained to you why he wanted them to be held in Pakistan, and that's when he started talking about Field Marshal Asim Munir. How did he start that, and what exactly did he say?
Yeah, it was very interesting that he kind of offered that up himself. He said, you know why? It's because of this field marshal. He's a great guy. I believe this was the exact quote. And he said that he had saved 30 million people's lives last year during the war, being able to end that war. And he was very complimentary of the field marshal. And I think when you get the President of the United States trust, that goes a very long way. And he is a pretty loyal man as well. So I think I haven't gotten the opportunity, obviously, to speak to the field marshal or interview him, but the feeling that I get is there must be something here if he's able to get Iran and the U.S. to the same table, and then have the president speak so highly of him.
So when President Trump was speaking with you, and this was yesterday, and the fact that he called you back, which means that in the first call, things weren't clear, then something happened. Within 37 minutes, he called you back. So obviously I'm sure he felt that he needed to speak with you and to tell you not to come back to New York. Which means that something must have happened which convinced him that these talks could become very real.
I mean, I don't exactly know. Maybe he was thinking about it and changed his mind. I have no idea what happened, but something changed his mind. And it was really, I mean, honestly, it was very kind of him to call me back to make sure that I wasn't on a plane back and missed my opportunity or had to fly all the 21 hours back just to turn around and come back again. So I was very grateful, not only for the scoop, but also just on a human level. That was very kind of him to do.
And so knowing President Trump as you do, what do you think he would be thinking right now in terms of where this conflict is and how the next round of talks could happen? And of course, now that you've said that he was very emphatic that they will be held in Pakistan, which I assume means that the role of the Pakistani leadership, both the Prime Minister and the Field Marshal, remains central in the next round also. So do you think he sounded like somebody who's now quite comfortable in finding a way out of this conflict?
I think he's very confident in finding a way out of the conflict. I think part of that could be with the blockade that he put on Iran just this week, but also in his talks with the Field Marshal, other Pakistani officials. I think that he has a lot of confidence, and it was based on probably a number of issues, but there's one sticking point that he was very clear about yesterday. He was speaking about, I asked him about the reports of a 20-year moratorium on allowing Iran to essentially start back up enrichment after 20 years. They would put it off for 20 years. And he was very emphatic. He says, I don't want that. I'm not a fan of that. He did not want to offer that to Iran as some kind of concession. I believe the quote he told me, I reported it, it was he didn't want them to have a win, in particular with that case. And it has a lot to do with various factors, speaking with nuclear experts.
How long was the conversation, roughly?
I actually couldn't tell you.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
But normally, he's a source. I mean, you can't get a source at a higher level. But, does he, when you're speaking with him, does he speak a lot, or do you drive the conversation through your questions, or you just wait and he goes on and then you add something? I mean, how does that work? How does the conversation flow?
It varies. It varies, just like you would speak to anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's given an interview to Fox News.
Yes.
And this interview has happened after he's spoken with you. I'm going to show you a clip, and then I would like to back on what do you think he means when he's saying. So let's hear what President Trump said to his interviewer from Fox News.
I had to divert, because if I didn't do that, right now you would have Iran with a nuclear weapon. And if they had a nuclear weapon, you would be calling everybody over there, sir. And you don't want to do that.
Well, you keep saying was. Is this war over?
I think it's close to over, yeah. I mean, I view it as very close to over. You know what? If I pulled up stakes right now, it would take them 20 years to rebuild that country. And we're not finished. We'll see what happens. I think they want to make a deal very badly.
So he's saying what is close to over. Is that the sense you were also getting when you spoke with him?
I think that probably reflects some of what he was telling me on the phone, that I shouldn't go back to the United States, that something was going to be happening within the next 48 hours, whether that be an announcement of talks or talks themselves. And so, yeah, that confidence is exactly what was reflected in my phone call, which I think took place just a few hours before that interview that we just watched.
Which means that we can see a President Trump now mentally ready to strike a good deal. Now, we don't know what the definition of that good is, but I think based on all of this and based on what you're telling me, it won't be surprising if he gives the go-ahead for the talks to be held in Islamabad as long as the Iranians are willing to come. And I think Iranians have no reason not to come. So quite possibly, we are looking at the second round of talks in Islamabad in the next few days.
Yeah, wouldn't that be wonderful? And we can finally put an end to this war that has just been wreaking havoc. And I know so many people want peace, especially the president himself.
And a lot of those journalists who were here, who've flown back off, 20-hour flights, are going to be now turning back and coming back. And you've ended up being the winner in so many ways.
Well, I lucked out, and I'm so grateful even to have a little bit more time here in Pakistan, because my experience here has just been very positive, and I am delighted to be able to tell the stories here.
And finally, how is this playing out back home in New York? Whatever you're reporting, how is that being picked up? What are your editors telling you? What kind of angles are they looking for? What are they saying to you about your reporting from Islamabad?
They're very excited and supportive of all of my international reporting endeavors. And I think that being able to take voices of Pakistani officials back to the United States, that's something rare that you don't get. Obviously, you can't get that in Washington, D.C. or New York. So adding that perspective of being able to speak to officials here and sending that back home, that's critical journalism, and I'm really proud to be able to do that.
That kind of journalism that you're doing, and of course, the fact that you can speak to President Trump and he calls you back, normally, there are sort of channels of communication in the government, and you don't get to directly call the president, and he doesn't normally pick up and speak with you. So is that something which is now the norm, and there is no issue with people under him trying to say, don't do this, let us filter the messages, let us decide who you speak to, who you shouldn't speak to? Is there some sort of a tension, or everybody's okay with the president just, calling up anybody and saying, this is what it is?
Well, nobody tells President Trump what to do. I think that's pretty clear from just even knowing his media personality. I still go to the White House more often than I go to the president. I mean, 10 times more often than I go to the president, because that is a critical communications office to be able to get information out. But this president is unique. He likes the media as much as that is, you see him with his presence out there, and he's easy to talk to. So I think it's something unique to President Trump, but I would certainly love to see more officials be able to take that on, because what a better way to get the message out.
I want to ask you one thing. I know it's a bit speculative, so pardon me for that, but I think this is very interesting for us also. You've spoken about him as a person, and he spoke about Field Marshal Asim Munir yesterday with you. And of course, the fact that Pakistan is playing the central role in all of this and will continue to do so from what we can gather. So based on this, if these talks succeed, which we all hope they do, and this conflict comes to an end through an agreement which is acceptable to all sides, and Pakistan is able to take this role to a logical conclusion, what kind of a relationship do you now foresee based on all of this between him and Pakistan, and between the Trump administration and Pakistan in the months and years ahead?
I think it could be a very warm relationship, especially with how highly he spoke yesterday on the phone. I mean, he kind of went on and on about the field marshal, and even encouraged me to learn more about him myself. And so,
is that so?
Yes. So I think that it has a lot of potential to be a warm relationship and a partnership there. That's something that could really change foreign policy as a whole, especially you think about how far we've come as countries and as friends. It's really remarkable to see this happen.
It is, and we are all hoping that things work out for everybody. Caitlin Donbos, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope that you have a wonderful stay. And we also hope that the next round of talks do actually take place in Islamabad. You get to report on them, we get to report on them, and the world gets an end to this conflict.
Yes.
That is what we're hoping for. Thank you again. We will take a short break. There's much more to come in the show. We will talk a little bit about the naval blockade and where it stands today. So do stay with us. So even as attempts continue to find a peaceful solution to this war, and even as Pakistan's diplomacy goes into higher gear to try and get the US and Iranian sides to sit across each other once again, and in the wake of President Donald Trump's statement that he would like the talks to be in Pakistan. In the backdrop of all of this, of course, is the naval blockade of the Straits of Hormuz, which of course is being done by the US Navy. Now, there are a number of questions being asked about the blockade, and clearly the danger is that if some conflict were to break out as a result of this blockade, it could reignite hostilities and seriously damage chances of peace, which of course everybody wants to take place, to happen. So to better understand the nature of this blockade, the legal side of this exercise, and where this leaves countries like China, for example, these are very crucial, important issues, and they are all grounded in law. And to discuss this, we have a guest who specializes in international maritime law. We are joined by Professor James Kraska. He is a professor at International Maritime Law and Chair, U.S. Naval War College. He is also a visiting professor at Harvard Law School and is also the author of the book Cultural Influences on the Law of the Seas. Professor Kraska, it's a pleasure to have you on our show today.
Thank you. It's my honor.
So I just want to start with this issue of the naval blockade. And the first question, which of course is being asked increasingly, is the legal position of such a blockade, given the fact that this blockade is happening in international waters. So is it legal? Because it doesn't seem to have UN sanction.
Yeah, so this is a great question. It is legal. So the United States and Iran are involved in an international armed conflict. And under Common Article 2 of the Geneva Conventions, the law of naval warfare and the law of armed conflict apply to govern their relationship. And what this means is that they may take belligerent measures against each other within this conflict lawfully. This is the exact same law that applies, for example, between Russia and Ukraine. Those individual Russian or Ukrainian soldiers are entitled to pursue military objectives, to destroy military objectives, and take other measures to try to prevail in the conflict. Likewise, in this conflict with Iran and the United States, they each may take measures that are recognized in the law of naval warfare. One of those measures is blockade. And so the United States has imposed a blockade on Iranian coasts, Iranian anchorages and ports, and Iranian cities. And therefore, this is a lawful measure so long as it meets the criteria. It must be effective, it must be applied impartially, and there's some other requirements. For example, there are some bare humanitarian requirements if the population comes to the point where it is in starvation. But the United States is exercising its right to enforce a blockade. And what this means for other countries is that they have a legal duty to respect the blockade. If they do not respect the blockade, then they are subject to enforcement action.
Professor, how does that make sense? For example, let's take China. Now, China takes most of bulk of its oil from Iran. And if a Chinese tanker, now China is not involved directly in this conflict, but China can turn around and say that this blockade doesn't have any sanction under any, from any international organization like the UN. So if China wants its own tankers to carry oil from some Iranian port back to China, how can the US actually stop the Chinese tanker from traveling back home? How does that work?
Yeah, this is a great question. So when two states are in a state of armed conflict or war, that means that all the other states are neutral states. And neutral states have rights, that their property is inviolable, but neutral states also have duties that they owe to the belligerents. And one of those duties is that they must respect a blockade. If they do not respect a blockade, then the vessels that attempt to breach the blockade are subject to enforcement action and ultimately even could be destroyed. And this is lawful. This is recognized in the law of naval warfare. It's set out, it's customary law, but it's set out in Hague Convention 1907, as well as the Newport Manual on the law of naval warfare.
So how is that different from Iran in a way blocking the Straits of Hormuz? The principle is the same.
Yes, so Iran may block the Strait of Hormuz for U.S. ships or Israeli ships because it is in an armed conflict with those two countries. But it may not affect the rights of those neutral Gulf states. And so those neutral Gulf states are not aiding the U.S. war effort. For example, the United States is not importing large amounts of oil from the Gulf. And therefore, those Gulf states are entitled to trade with other countries. So the United States can enforce and also the United States may exercise the belligerent right of visit and search in the law of naval warfare to go on board neutral ships and determine whether those neutral ships are aiding the Iranian war effort.
By the same logic, Professor Kraska, then Iran could also turn around and say, we are also going to exercise our right and block all those ships which belong not just to Israel and America, but all those other countries whom Iran thinks are actually aiding and abetting this war effort against them. It's the same logic.
Yeah, it's the same logic, except there's one difference. The right of visit and search is may be conducted against merchant vessels. And this means that you go on board the merchant vessel. You're not allowed to just attack the merchant vessel. First, you must confirm what is the cargo and whether it is actually aiding the belligerent. And then at that point, you're allowed to divert or detain the merchant vessel. So destruction of a merchant vessel is the last resort because there are seafarers on board, civilian seafarers. So it's a protected civilian object. So to the extent that Iran has a naval force and is able to do that, then it would be entitled to conduct the belligerent right of visit and search to determine whether each of those ships is aiding the United States in some way.
This may hold weight purely and strictly in a legal sense, Professor. But when you look at this problem more from not just a political framework, but also a moral one, then there is an equality between the action that the Americans are taking and the action that Iran is taking. Of course, the difference between how do you stop a ship? Do you attack it first, or do you board it and search it first? That's a nuance that you are referring to. Pardon my slang, but tomato, it's essentially that difference.
Well, the moral questions inform the law. In other words, the law was created by states and recognized through time. I mean, these laws go back centuries, actually. And so the states, the sovereign states, the international community have decided that this is where you draw the line, that civilian merchant vessels are protected. They're protected. This is the entire purpose of the International Committee of the Red Cross, is to reduce or ameliorate the effects of war on civilian populations. On the other hand, if those merchant ships are supporting enemy forces, then you may board them and divert and detain them, and ultimately you may capture those vessels as prize and convert them to your own purposes. So this is a line, a moral line that has been drawn in the law and reflected through the consensus of states throughout history. And what this means is that you may not just launch missiles randomly at commercial ships, as Iran has done. So I would suggest that the moral line is quite clear, and it's been established for quite a number of centuries.
But how can the naval blockade be legal when the entire war is being called illegal by the European allies, by the United Nations, because there is no sanction, by the Congress in the US, which is saying that, we have not allowed it. So when the entire war effort is being called, acknowledged and recognized as illegal, how can one part of it, that being the naval blockade, be legal?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you so much for that. So as far as the United States, the president has commander-in-chief authority. So I think that I would disagree with that the commander-in-chief does not have authority to exercise force to defend the United States or U.S. interests. With regard to international scholars or media that suggest this, it mixes two different bodies of law. There's a law, jus ad bellum, concerning the initiation of the use of force. In this case, the United States and Israel are claiming self-defense because of the Iranian nuclear program and Iran's stated commitment many times to attack the United States and Israel, even with nuclear weapons, as horrific as that sounds. So that's the basis for self-defense nationally. With regard to the measures within the conflict, there's a distinction between the law concerning the initiation of the conflict and then the measures that may be taken in the conflict. I'll give you a perfect example that is outside of this situation, because there's lots of emotion attached to the current conflict. And in my view, this makes people not able to really see the law in a clear way. Let's look at the conflict in Russia and Ukraine. Regardless of which country is responsible for that war, Russia or Ukraine, individual Russian soldiers, individual Russian military units and aircraft commanders are entitled to attack Ukrainian soldiers. They are entitled under the law of armed conflict. If they were not entitled, they would all be individually guilty of murder or attempted murder. But that's not the case, because they are exercising their rights within the conflict. And in that sense, Russia and Ukraine and their armed forces are subject to the same set of rules, regardless of which country is responsible for starting that.
I want to raise a point here, Professor. I understand your perspective, but the problem that we see in all this is the selective application of law. That's where the problem really comes in. When it suits the US as the aggressor, then the law is invoked. But when it doesn't suit the US, the law can be just shredded. And I'll give you the example of the president saying that we are going to target power plants and bridges and civilian infrastructure, which is clearly, earmarked as being a war crime. Again, targeting schools and killing 180 children in Iran, now acknowledged almost universally as having been done by an American Tomahawk missiles. So the issue is, where it suits the US, law is invoked. Where it doesn't, it's just thrown to the wind. That's where the real problem then begins to manifest itself.
So I think that there's a difference of view in the law of armed conflict over whether war-sustaining industries are lawful targets. And I would suggest that most countries actually have accepted in reality. Let's look at Ukraine, for example. Ukraine has targeted Russian merchant vessels because it says that they are sustaining the war effort of Russia. So there is additional Protocol 1 of the Geneva Convention that that describes military objectives only as those that are aiding the war effort directly, such as military aircraft or military formations or warships. But the law of naval warfare is a broader definition historically, which includes an economic component to the conflict. And the United States has always, as well as a number of other countries, have always said that war-sustaining industry or war-sustaining operations may be targeted. So this might include, for example, the oil terminals on Kharg Island. So far, the United States has not targeted those oil facilities, only security forces. However, the U.S. has always held the position, and a number of other countries also hold the position, that if you're in a conflict and there are oil industry, for example, that is supporting the enemy war effort, then it could be targeted.
What about bridges?
So go ahead.
What about bridges, which Donald Trump was targeting or saying that he would?
Absolutely. I mean, NATO forces destroyed bridges both in the Balkans as well as in the Iraq conflict.
So, Professor, by that logic, because Iran and the US are now in a conflict, and all those laws of a conflict are applying to them, even though it was a war of choice by the Americans. By that same logic, if Iran were to just somehow, one way or the other, come and blow up the Brooklyn Bridge in New York, that would be fine and completely legal.
So there has to be a connection between the military objective and the anticipated military gain weighed against the expected loss of civilian life or civilian harm. So there's an equation for each strike that has to be done. Rather, it's not just a gratuitous attack on civilian infrastructure, but rather the balance of military benefit is sufficient to outweigh any expected harm against civilians.
So the answer is basically yes, if civilian lives are not lost but the Brooklyn Bridge is blown up, that is fine and legal.
Well, again, each case is different. And in my view, it would be very hard to say that Iran would achieve some sort of military benefit by blowing up the Brooklyn Bridge. That's not going to really impede the U.S. war effort. So terrorism is not allowed. Simply raining missiles down on civilian cities randomly is not permitted. But of course, if there were some sort of military objective that has a dual use or a dual purpose, let's say something like a cell phone tower.
Who defines that? Who defines that in a conflict? If I ask Iran could give me 10 reasons why Brooklyn Bridge is aiding the war effort of the United States. Just like the US can say that we are taking out these bridges because Iran is using them to funnel X, Y, or Z.
So I would suggest that I'm not positive that Iranian leaders or scholars would say the Brooklyn Bridge per se. There could be reasonable disagreement, maybe in theater especially. But I think that the law of armed conflict is actually quite well known, and if it's violated, then I think states understand when they are. If you're randomly launching missiles at civilian capitals in your neighborhood, then that clearly is a violation of the law of armed conflict. It's terrorism. And terrorism against the civilian population is not.
And targeting a school and killing 160, 70 school girls would also be classified as terrorism perpetrated by the United States?
So in that case, I would suggest that the school, I don't know a lot about this situation, but I would be very confident that the school itself was not targeted. So there are civilians that are killed in armed conflict. They may never be targeted except if the anticipated military advantage outweighs the expected civilian loss. In the case of this school, from what I understand, this was not an intentional strike.
Professor Kraska, thank you so much for shedding light on the international law and also helping us understand why it is not taken that seriously because of its selective application and also in many ways selective interpretation of how laws work for those who are more powerful and don't work for those who actually need the protection of laws. That's the full frame for tonight. See you tomorrow.